we saw out there. That was nice. Well, I hope you had a wonderful Sabbath day, and as we are closing the Sabbath together, I want to welcome you to our final meeting with Dr. Nedley and ask you to just let all the words that we've been listening to sink in and think about the different things that we've been learning. And I want to say a special welcome as well to anyone who's joining us online. We're glad that you're here. If you missed any of the previous presentations, you can check back on our YouTube channel, Port Orchard Adventist Church, and you will be able to see them there. So we invite you to engage with those. If you're watching on Facebook, feel free to comment along the way, and we're glad that you're joining us. Let's say an opening prayer together. Dear God, thank you so much for the ways that you've led this weekend. I want to thank you for the peace that you can give to our hearts through troubled times. And I want to thank you especially for our speaker who made the effort to travel all the way up here to Washington. And please bless his family and bless him and his wife as they travel back later this weekend. Keep them safe and continue to bless the ministry and the work that they are doing at Weimar University. And thank you so much for how you have the ability to help us heal and to bring mental wellness into our lives. In your name, amen. Once again, we will invite up Dr. Nedley to share his final presentation with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pastor Natalie. We didn't realize it until lunch. Sorry about that. Are we okay? Yeah, all right. But as Erica was saying, I was trying to figure out the islands. What's the one that starts with a V right across there? That's it. Is it Vashon? Yeah, and then that's the V, and as in Victor. And then, of course, we were up in Manchester Park earlier today, and right across from there is Bainbridge. And then, of course, those are not part of the San Juan, so I'm more familiar with the San Juan Islands up there. But as we were driving around seeing all these different locations, Erica says this Puget Sound is like one big maze, and trying to figure out where everything's at and where the bridges are and ferries and all of those things. But it certainly is one of the most beautiful places in the country. And so you're fortunate to live in a beautiful fresh air environment here. And that is something that actually helps our mental health. So tonight we're going to be talking about something that's very important, and that is brain plasticity. And that is our ability for our brain to change in positive ways even throughout life. Our brain is actually different than our bodies in several ways. First of all, the oldest cells in your entire being are in your brain. Those were the cells that actually formed first in the womb. And all of this activity that occurred in those neurons, those cells are actually still alive. They're also the most sensitive cells, and that's why the circulation is very different in the brain, called the blood-brain barrier, to prevent large molecules from coming in and causing toxicity because those neurons cannot be regenerated. But what can change is the organization of them, the activity of them, as well as the pathways regarding thought and behavior. And our brains were actually, although our bodies do age to the point, and I've lived long enough now, that I realized when I was younger, when I would exercise, I would actually get better and get significantly stronger in the areas that I was exercising. And the older you get, you realize that you don't necessarily get stronger, but by exercising, you're able to maintain where you're at. And if you don't exercise, you are going to lose it, and you're going to start losing significant function. So exercise is vital when you're younger, but it's even more vital when you're older in order to be able to maintain the functions that we have. But our brain was actually not like our body. Our brains were actually designed to improve throughout our lifespan. And so if our brains are not improving, we're not taking full advantage of what we call positive neuroplasticity. So if you were very sharp when you were young in college, you actually should be sharper as a 60 or 70 or 80-year-old, because the brain can continue to improve throughout life. And so, and of course, brain plasticity is very important no matter what age we're at, as we will talk about. So this is called neuroplasticity, and the previous scientific consensus years ago was that the brain develops during a critical period in early childhood and then remains relatively unchanged or static. But now we know the brain has the ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. Neuroplasticity can make your brain quite resilient, and it's also the process by which all permanent learning takes place in your brain, such as playing a musical instrument, mastering a different language, or even mastering ice skating. These things all involve neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity can be so amazing. I've actually seen this where a person actually redid his bicycle so that when he turns right, the bicycle wheel turns left. Now, if you've learned how to ride a bike and you get on a bicycle like that, what do you think's going to happen? You're not going to be able to ride that bike. It's going to be pretty hard. But through neuroplasticity, you can actually train your brain that when you turn right, you're going to go left. And you can become an expert bicyclist with opposite functions. Now, once you become an expert, if you've been working on that, if you get on a regular bike, are you going to be able to ride it well? No. You've actually dislearned how to be able to ride that. Now, if you go back and forth all the time, it'll take you a little bit, but you'll be able to figure out which bike you're on, and you'll be able to stay with that. And this is the wonderful power of the brain. You know, one of the big errors that we have in our society, and it's promulgated throughout culture in certain areas, is that some people, or in virtually all of us, cannot change. There are certain things that, quotes, we cannot change, but that ignores the power of neuroplasticity. Our brains are developed so that they actually can change. This is why even some of these terms that are used, such as orientation terms, as if an individual has a fixed inborn state that they cannot change. There are some things that we can't change. We can't change the color of our skin per se. There are physical attributes that we can't change. But in regards to the brain, it can change. And so we might be oriented a certain way to like certain things, but because of neuroplasticity, we may actually dislike that and learn to like other things that are healthy for us. And that's the power of neuroplasticity. And so neuroplasticity enables people to recover from stroke. It enables people to recover from brain injuries, birth abnormalities, even overcome autism. We actually treat autism in our program because it's a neuroplasticity program, and we can actually help to train the brain even in regards to social intelligence for those with autism. ADD can be overcome. ADHD, learning disabilities, and other brain deficits. One year we did an emotional intelligence summit just in the area of neuroplasticity. And so the talks were all centering in on this. And you might want to try to get the talk by Barbara Arrowsmith-Young. Barbara Arrowsmith-Young had significant learning disabilities all the way through. She couldn't read. She couldn't even tell time. And this was all the way up until she was a late teenager. She was told she'd never be able to be successful academically. And she actually started, fortunately, she had a frontal lobe. One thing that is necessary for the power of neuroplasticity to occur is you do have to have some frontal lobe function. And she did have some frontal lobe function, and as a result, she began to actually do some things to train her brain to learn. And not only was she able to do that, learn how to tell time, which took some time for her to do. She actually learned how to read, and she ended up becoming a PhD neuroscientist in the area of neuroplasticity. And she conducts all sorts of programs for children and adults with learning disabilities on how the brain can change so that they can actually learn better. And so this is something, again, humanity thinks, oh, you can't help these people. They have this permanent learning disability. No, if there is frontal lobe function, that brain can actually change in very positive ways. Not only can it overcome learning disabilities, it can recover from depression. It can recover from anxiety disorders, even PTSD, addictions, reverse obsessive compulsive patterns, all through the power of neuroplasticity. So what can change the brain? Neuroplasticity is a term referring to the ability of your brain to reorganize itself, both physically and functionally, throughout your life due to your environment, your behavior, your thinking or your thoughts, and your emotions. And so these things that we've been talking about earlier today have a powerful role in neuroplasticity. And so part of it is we have to have some behavioral changes in positive ways in order to tap into this power to its full extent, as well as changes in thinking and emotions. So what does all this mean? What it means is you're not stuck with the brain you're born with. And, but I should say, but there are downsides. Brain plasticity, which makes your brain amazingly resilient, also makes it vulnerable to outside and internal, usually unconscious influences that can imbalance the brain and cause you to be easily manipulated, with the result that you are no longer in charge of your own destiny. This is what we call negative neuroplasticity. And so the brain can also deteriorate as a result of this. And so, of course, there's pros and cons. The good news is your brain makes physical changes based on the repetitive things you do and the experiences you have. The bad news is your brain makes physical changes based on the repetitive things you do and the experiences you have. And so it's very important for us to be able to manage and control those repetitive things that we're doing and the experiences we're having. Your brain actually wires itself and forms neuronal connections based on what you do over and over in your life. Now, it was thought years ago that plasticity, when we first started to learn about it, that it was somehow turned off at 30. In other words, once the frontal lobe is through development, your brain is fixed. Well, that is not true either. Plasticity dials back on in adulthood, and there's kind of on and off switches in regards to neuroplasticity in the brain, when specific conditions that enable or trigger plasticity are met. What recent research has shown is that under the right circumstances, the power of brain plasticity can help adults' minds grow. Although certain brain machinery tends to decline with age, there are steps people can take to turn plasticity and reinvigorate the machinery. And this is Dr. Merzenich, who is one of the experts in neuroplasticity. He's written an entire textbook on it. So the circumstances that turn this plasticity switch on in positive ways are focused attention, determination, hard work, and maintaining overall brain health. And so we're going to talk about each of these things here today. Our behaviors powerfully influence our thoughts, and one of the ways in which our behaviors can impact neuroplasticity has to do, again, with physical exercise. Physical exercise does help the brain. It does help us to build up certain neurotransmitters. It actually helps our frontal lobe as well when we become aerobically fit. A good circulation in the body is going to result in a good circulation of the brain. And so this is one of the reasons why physical fitness, if we want to turn on those positive neuroplasticity switches, we want to become physically fit if we're not fit, and then maintain that fitness. In addition, studies show that working with our hands in 3 dimensions also helps. This is one of the reasons for hobbies or even playing a musical instrument like the violin. By the way, this is something that helped Albert Einstein. I don't know if you remember, but Albert Einstein was sent home in the 3rd grade by his 3rd grade teacher saying he would never amount to anything academically. Said, this kid can't learn. And maybe he can be a janitor somewhere. Maybe he can do something along these lines, but you need to just, quit wasting your time putting him in school, because he's not going to be able to succeed. Well, his mom didn't put him in janitorial services. She actually took him to violin lessons. And he began to learn how to play the violin. And those exercises that were occurring in 3 dimensions, plus the benefits of the music that he was learning, started to really turn on those positive neuroplasticity switches, and his learning disability dissipated as a result. And even when Einstein was stuck on a problem, he would say, when I'm stuck and I can't seem to go any further, I will go to my violin and I'll start improvising on my violin. And then that creativity portion of his brain came forward. And of course, he came up with equations and things that no one else had ever thought of, that we know are very true and has actually helped the world in so many ways. And this started from working with his hands in 3D. This is one of the reasons I gave a lecture to 3rd-year medical students on Friday at Loma Linda University. I'm an adjunct clinical professor of medicine at Loma Linda University, and they were having the 3rd years come out of their clinicals and learn some didactic things about them. And I was actually showing them the studies on neuroplasticity and 3-dimensional work. And one of the questions I got from the medical students was, does that mean surgery, if I become a surgeon and I'm doing surgery and working with my hands in 3D, will that actually help my brain? And the answer is yes, it will. In fact, many surgeons recognize this benefit. This is why many surgeons just love doing surgery, because there's something positive that happens to their brain in that process of doing 3-dimensional work. This is why some ladies like crocheting or like doing things with their hands, and it actually is helpful for the brain. And of course, there's many things that we could do that are 3-dimensional activities on those 6 days that we're laboring. It may be gardening. Gardening is one of those great things. There's all sorts of working with your hands in 3D. Cooking. Cooking is something utilizing your hands in 3 dimensions. Even playing ping pong is working with your hands in 3 dimensions. And so these things can be beneficial At Weimar University, I actually teach a freshman class. It's a required a general ed class at Weimar called Optimize Your Brain. And half of their grade is based on them learning the principles of optimal brain function, but the other half is the lab portion where they actually have to put these things into practice. And so 6 days a week, they have to be working with their hands at least 20 minutes a day. And you'd be surprised at some of the complaints of these students. I have to study, I'm pre-med. Why do I have to take 20 minutes out of my day and work with my hands in 3D? Well, the whole idea is you're going to be able to learn more efficiently. Your brain's going to actually change in the right direction. And we've actually shown that even in case examples at Weimar Institute. One year we had a kid, he's actually down there in medical school right now, but it was his first year at Weimar, and he was not doing well in the sciences. And he really wanted to be a doctor. And fortunately, he was taking Optimize Your Brain, and he started to look at the studies on working with his hands in 3D, and he said, I'm working at a desk job right now. I'd like to change and work at the farm. Well, our farm manager doesn't allow you to work at the farm unless you work 20 hours a week. And he was only working 6 hours a week, and he was still not doing well in the sciences. But he said, I want to have my brain be better, so if I'm going to have to work 20 hours a week and my brain would be better, I might be better off, and so please put me at the farm. I want to work 20 hours a week. And so he worked at the farm 20 hours a week, and what do you think happened to his science grades? They went up significantly. I mean, so much so that he ended up doing good on the MCAT, and now he's a student in medical school. He wasn't in the class I taught. I think he's a second-year student down there, so he wasn't a third year. But a bright young man and someone whose brain changed. He wasn't able to learn well at all, but changed as a result of the power of just this principle of neuroplasticity. Adequate sleep is very important for the brain. And the best sleep is early to bed, early to rise. Chronotherapy, this is where we set our body clock with light therapy every morning. This can be also beneficial. And then another whole area is enhancing the frontal lobe. This might be the form of music that we're listening to. The syncopated rock and roll rhythms actually are frontal lobe suppressant, not only while they're being listened to, but they cause 8 different adverse effects on the frontal lobe as far as the after effects are concerned. Discordant and dysrhythmic and music also is not healthy for the brain. It might be enjoyed by the musicians because of uniqueness and difference, but it's actually going to cause some detriment as far as the frontal lobe. Rapid scene of reference changes that entertainment television has actually is frontal lobe suppressing at the time and also after effects as well. So we want to improve that frontal lobe. This is a very critical part of improving our neuroplasticity. And then diet also has a significant role. Now, what you see here is a synapse on the screen. When an electrical activity occurs in that top neuron, there's a chemical released, we'll call it serotonin, and then it's picked up by the receptor neuron, and when it does that, another electrical activity occurs, and this is the communication in the brain. Every pharmaceutical company in America is trying to manipulate this synapse in some way, shape, or form because depression or anxiety often has brain chemistry issues behind it. And so if we can find out what those brain chemistry issues are and start supplying the lack, we can get improvements in certain areas of the brain. Now, this next slide is a diagram. Once we make enough serotonin, it gets stored in vesicles. And then when the electrical activity occurs, those vesicles are released into the synapse. And once that receptor picks up on it and the electrical transmission occurs, the serotonin is released, and it's actually to be vacuumed back up into the neuron. The reason why it's best to be vacuumed back up is so it can be used again, because serotonin is not something that we can supply in the diet or supply in IV. I can tell you that if serotonin deficit in your bloodstream was the issue behind depression, the most popular treatment would be going into the hospital and getting IV serotonin. Why don't we do that? Because that serotonin will not cross the blood-brain barrier. It's too large a molecule. So this is why measuring serotonin is useless. I get a lot of people coming to me saying, I want to know what my serotonin levels are. Well, we can find out by doing a spinal tap, because what's in the brain is very different than what's in the bloodstream, and of course there's complications behind that. But there are better ways of determining the serotonin activity in the brain. And so serotonin has to be produced from tryptophan. Tryptophan is also too large to get into the brain. It requires a carrier to get it across. And we have to have the right things for that carrier to get it across. So it's quite a process to be able to make one serotonin molecule or two and to store it, but we have to have all that manufacturing plan in the brain. Serotonin is a frontal lobe enhancer. It does help us in regards to our mood, also helps us in regards to managing emotions. If we have a serotonin deficit, we're going to get much more stressed, we're going to get more anxious, we're going to have more potential for panic and those sorts of things. So when people come, we're measuring a lot of these things in the bloodstream. We don't measure serotonin in the bloodstream, as I mentioned, but we'll measure something to tell us about serotonin activity in the brain to see if that's the issue or other types of issues. But what the drug companies do, are there drugs that are given to help you make more serotonin? You would think so, because the doctor says, take this and it will help your serotonin levels. But actually, there's no drug on the market that helps you make more serotonin. There's no drug on the market that helps you pick up more receptors. How are the drugs working then? Why is the doctor saying it's going to help your serotonin? You see those vacuum cleaners there and the neurons there on the side, that releasing neuron? These drugs do cross the blood-brain barrier, and they slide into that vacuum cleaner and they plug the vacuum cleaner. They should be called vacuum cleaner pluggers, but instead the pharmaceutical industry has a nice word or nice phrase for them. What are they called? Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. The reuptake inhibitors is the clue that it's plugging that vacuum cleaner. Now, how does that work? Well, that allows more serotonin to be in the synapse if you have a shortage of it, and it's going to get vacuumed back up again before an electrical transmission occurs. If you plug those vacuum cleaners, you'll have more serotonin around in the synapse for a while. But what do you think the long-term effect of that's going to be? You're going to even deplete the neuron even further. And so this is why people, when they start on the medication pathway, 9 months later or a year later, they're just as depressed while taking the medicine. Now they need more medicine, higher doses, then they need additional medicine, and often they become psychiatric cripples. And so now they're on 4 different medicines by the time they come to our program, and now severely depressed because of all the relapse that occurs. The issue, and this is why even the experts in the psychiatric and pharmaceutical field say very clearly that medications are not the answer. They will never be the answer because they can't actually help us to produce more of the substance that we're lacking or help us to pick up the receptors. They are a partial improvement. Not that you can't get improvement. If you're an undermethylator, you will get improvement. About 70% of people will get at least some improvement with these medicines, but it's over the course of short-term benefit. And if we are using these medicines, we actually need to be looking at where the primary defect is and start fixing that. And then those medicines will only need to be used short-term, and then we can get the individual off the medicine and actually have fixed the primary defect. And often what we need to do to fix the primary defect is diet. So we need tryptophan, and we need it in the brain. And studies show tryptophan improves premenstrual dysphoria from ovulation to the 3rd day of menstruation. It improves depression and seasonal affective disorder. It improves insomnia because we need serotonin to make melatonin at night. It even improves sleep apnea. and it improves nicotine withdrawal or withdrawal from drugs. By the way, every one of our programs, we've had probably one person over the year, in each program come in with nicotine. Do you think it's higher or lower than that now? It's much higher. Yeah, and it's more addictive because the vaping is actually harder to get rid of because of the higher doses and things like that. So in our last program, I think out of the 20 participants there, now you need to realize we're dealing with a younger age group. The highest rates of depression right now in the country are between the ages of 15 and 25. And so those are the primary group. We're doing a lifestyle program, but it's primarily a teenage young adult lifestyle program. And out of those 20 people that were there, 8 of them had nicotine addictions. And that those nicotine addictions can actually be helped a lot. And that they talk about how easy it is when they're in the program. I couldn't get off this before. Why is it so easy? Why am I not getting the craving? Well, it's because we're actually helping them to produce more serotonin. So tryptophan in the diet, I was told in medical school, whole milk was a great source of tryptophan, and it's not a bad source, 46 milligrams per 100 grams. But there are higher ones, black-eyed peas, walnuts, almonds, sesame seeds, gluten. If you're not sensitive to gluten, which 96% of the public are not, gluten is actually healthy for you. It has glutamine, it actually has tryptophan. It's going to be able to, the tryptophan from wheat is able to cross the blood-brain barrier and can help us make more serotonin and melatonin. Tofu actually is very helpful. It's a concentrated source of tryptophan. And tryptophan has to come with carbs. We've actually done radioactive studies on tryptophan from turkey, and the tryptophan from turkey does not end up in your brain. It can end up in your muscle, but it won't end up in your brain because it has to have carbs with it. It has to be an insulin-mediated mechanism to get the tryptophan into the brain. And so this is why we have these foods that have carbs in it in order to get the tryptophan in. And we also, of course, need to have other nutrients to be able to make the serotonin from the tryptophan, like enough magnesium. We also need enough vitamin B6. And so this is why we measure these things when people come into our program, because we want to optimize their brain so their neuroplasticity can be very positively affected. There are 5 competitive amino acids. This is one of the reasons why high-protein diets do not help. You would think, well, tryptophan is a building block of protein, so let's just dump a lot of protein in this patient. The issue with that is we end up getting more of the competitors than we do the tryptophan, and those competitors bind on to that carrier across the blood-brain barrier, and they actually lower the tryptophan levels in the brain because of the too much competition. And so high-protein diets are not the solution. They'll actually lower your serotonin production. And so we also want to get food that has higher tryptophan compared to those 5 amino acids. And whole milk and salmon have the same ratio, 40% tryptophan, 60% of the 6 amino acids. But I know I've mentioned a lot here, but I'll just see how well you're listening and focusing here today. Out of those 2, milk and salmon, which one would get more tryptophan into the brain? Some say salmon. Some are going to say milk. Actually, the milk has it. Why will we get more tryptophan into the brain from milk than from salmon? Because of the carbs, that's right. Milk has carbohydrates. Salmon is a carbohydrate-deficient food. When you're eating salmon, you're getting protein, you're getting fat, but you're not getting the carbs. And so it's the same issue with turkey. And so even though it has the same ratio of the competitors, you're going to do a lot better with the milk than the salmon. Now, even better ratios than milk is beef, chicken, and brown rice. Which one of those will you get tryptophan into the brain? Appreciably. Brown rice. The same issue with beef and chicken, high in protein, high in fat, don't have the carbs. Black-eyed peas have more of the tryptophan compared to the ratios. Soybeans have even more. Black walnuts have even more. Pumpkin seeds have a lot. They're in the top 3. Tofu is actually top 4, I should say. Tofu is in the top 3, but there are 2 foods that are higher than tofu in getting tryptophan into the brain. Those foods are almonds, and I'm sorry it cut off the bottom one. I had to carry that in from another presentation here, and it didn't quite work with PowerPoint. Anyone know what the number 1 food is in getting tryptophan into the brain? It's actually sesame seeds. Sesame seeds have an 81% tryptophan compared to the competition. So this is the advantage of hummus. It's also the advantage of tahini and things that are made with sesame. It will actually help us in our production of serotonin. In stress-prone subjects, high-carb, low-protein food, it doesn't mean inadequate, but it means low, but adequate, prevents a deterioration of mood and performance under uncontrollable laboratory stress conditions. Stress-prone subjects have a higher risk of brain serotonin deficiency. In such subjects, higher natural carbs increase personal control. Carbohydrates prevent a functional shortage of central serotonin during acute stress due to their potentiating effect on brain tryptophan. Now, another amino acid that's very important is tyrosine. Tyrosine is incorporated in a protein of all life forms and is a precursor for the synthesis of thyroxine. What is thyroxine? That's your thyroid hormone. Does thyroid hormone have to do with our mental health? Yes, it does. And so a lot of people ask me naturally what they can do to help their thyroid. Well, that's one of the things is that you can have tyrosine because tyrosine turns into thyroid. If we don't have enough tyrosine, we're not going to be able to make enough thyroid. And so that's a simple solution. But it also turns into melanin and enkephalins and 2 neurotransmitters. What are the neurotransmitters we get from tyrosine? Dopamine and norepinephrine. Now, what does dopamine help us with? It helps you to be happy. But it also particularly helps us with motivation. If you have a motivation problem, then you have a dopamine problem. And unfortunately, probably the people that needed this lecture the most, that knew about it, didn't come here tonight because they had the dopamine problem. And that means they weren't properly motivated because of that dopamine issue. This is why, as I mentioned earlier today, if you know someone that needs fix, send them to our program because even though they're not motivated, they will become motivated in our program because their dopamine levels will start to turn around. And one of the ways they'll start to be enhanced is by getting the tyrosine into the brain to make the dopamine. Norepinephrine, what does that help us with? Norepinephrine is a cousin of adrenaline. Adrenaline is epinephrine. Norepinephrine is a cousin of it. So you might stand to reason, what is it going to help us with? Energy. That's right. It's going to help us with focus, with energy. And so this is an important amino acid. Tyrosine is also a potent antioxidant and it stimulates growth hormone production. And it's a therapeutic benefit in improving depression, also high blood pressure. Interestingly, how the pharmaceutical industry tries to get us to have more dopamine activity and norepinephrine activity. They're having a hard time with the dopamine part. But the norepinephrine part, they also have designed drugs that go into the norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. Those are called SNRIs. And those are the ones that are supposed to give us more energy because more norepinephrine activity. But these drugs, although they can improve energy, they come at an expense because they worsen hypertension. Where when we actually take care of the underlying defect of not getting enough tyrosine, we'll actually improve both the depression, the energy, and the blood pressure will actually come down if it's too high. And so you get benefits across the board. And normally when you're doing things God's way, you get only benefits and you don't get any of the bad effects. and nature's substances, many of nature's substances are along that line. But notice tyrosine is also going to improve cognitive function, memory, Parkinson's disease, PKU, and I'm looking around the room to see if anyone's suffering from this. Not right now. Narcolepsy. What is narcolepsy? That's when you're wanting to stay awake, but you just can't help it, and you're falling asleep. I noticed earlier today you had a few narcoleptics that needed tyrosine in your audience, but that's okay. But Parkinson's disease is a disease of not enough dopamine in the substantia nigra. And I'll tell you what a difference things like this can make. This is probably about 3 or 4 years ago. We had a lady who was trying to get into our program, and even more so than her trying to get into our program was her husband trying to get her in. Now, you have to be screened, and we don't just take all comers because we want to make sure you qualify for the program. And we also want to make sure that you have the appropriate ability to be able to have this positive neuroplasticity. And unfortunately, she had an issue that denied her access to the program. The issue that she had was she could not exercise. Why could she not exercise at all? In fact, she was wheelchair bound. She couldn't because she had advanced Parkinson's. And we only have 20 seats. We always have a waiting list. And so we're taking a seat away from someone who actually can exercise and do better. And so our intake person said, sorry, you don't qualify for the program. So a couple of weeks later, her husband called and says, have you checked with Dr. Nedley? I request for you to talk to Dr. Nedley because I think he'll have more compassion than you do in letting her in the program. So she said, well, I will talk to Dr. Nedley. And so I reminded her of one other thing when she talked to me. I said, we don't have 24/7 individualized nursing care, so we can't feed her, we can't dress her, we can't do all of those things. And so she wouldn't qualify for that reason either. Well, when she told her, when our intake nurse case manager told him that, he saw that as an opportunity because he says, I will come with her, I will feed her, I will dress her, I will do all of those nursing things for her. Please let her into the program. Well, we still didn't let her in, but this was now, our programs start on Thursday usually. So this is Monday morning. I get a call from her neurologist at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland, and says, please let her into your program. And I said, she's got Parkinson's. Parkinson's is not something we're going to be able to fix. He says, I know, I'm her neurologist. I'm her Parkinson's neurologist. I'm not asking you to fix that. We're doing what we can for that. But she does have a lot of depression, and I know that's contributing to it, so please let her into the program. So I told our case manager at that point, well, since I got a call from this neurologist, and he's very insistent, let's go ahead. And of course, the nurse case manager, by this time the program was full, and we knew it would be. But I said, move her to the top of the list if there's someone that cancels. Well, Thursday morning, someone did cancel, and so she was called, and her husband had her on the next flight from Baltimore to Sacramento. And she shows up, and our staff hadn't been notified of this. And so they see this wheelchair coming into Weimar with this lady that's not qualifying, obviously, for our program. And so I get a knock by at the head of our program, administrative head, saying, what in the world just happened? How did we accept her? And I said, well, she's not officially accepted till I see her, so put her up, move her up, I'll see her. And in my visit, I wanted to see if the husband would say the same thing. Sometimes things change, after they get in. And so he says, I will feed her, I will dress her, I will do all of those things. Thank you so much for letting her here. Please let her stay. And so we did leave her to stay, and so she was on the bottom floor where the wheelchair, there's hills at Weimar, You know, there's not any flat place for very long because we're in the foothills of the Sierras there. But in the bottom floor of the inn where we run the program, you can go out without having to go through stairs. And then you wheel up outside to where the cafeteria was. So I did tell her that night as I was seeing her, you have a dopamine problem, and so we're going to give you a lot of L-tyrosine to see if we can get the cells that are making dopamine to be able to have enough substrate to make more. And we'll give you some tomorrow morning as well. And let's see how that works out. And so she took the tyrosine that night. She took the tyrosine first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. And now she's being wheeled out of the door by her husband. And as she's being wheeled out, she says, "Stop the wheelchair right now." And he stops it. And I wasn't there to see it, but she gets out of this wheelchair and she starts walking on her own power to the cafeteria. And he says, "Honey, don't, you're going to fall, don't do that." And she says, "Get out of my way." And she, obviously we didn't cure her Parkinson's, but we improved it. And of course, with the dopamine deficit, we were able to improve it as well. And of course, with the CBT and the other things, she totally turned around. She actually sends us thank you notes every few months for allowing her into that program. Her neurologist even sent us a thank you note as well. But the point is, if tyrosine can do that for someone that has that much challenges, what can it do for someone that doesn't have those challenges if they're having a dopamine deficit for whatever those reasons might be? So those given tyrosine have significantly reduced headache, stress, fatigue, muscle aches, and sleepiness compared to controls. Improvements noted in mood, mental states, happiness, mental clarity, hostility, tension, and cognitive math tests. Coding map compass, pattern recognition in the tyrosine group. Feelings of vigor and improvements in blood pressure also occur. But it's a different set of foods that have tyrosine. As you can see, the greens come out pretty good. Mustard greens, lamb's quarters towards the bottom. By the way, lamb's quarters is not the hind leg of a small sheep. What are lamb's quarters? It's a green. Do they have that green here in Washington? No? Yeah, it grows wild, yeah. It grows as a weed where we're at, and when Erica sees that weed in the garden, she allows it to grow and become tender. And it's actually a very tasty green. It's actually the highest green in calcium, over 464 milligrams per cup of lamb's quarters, but it's also high in tyrosine. Tomatoes even higher yet. Tofu is a good source here, but there's a source higher than tofu, and that's the green soy. What is green soy called? Edamame, one of the reasons why we serve that in our program. Almonds end up being a good source here too. Oats, sunflower seeds, peanuts are an excellent source of tyrosine, but highest on the list are pumpkin and squash seeds. But we also have to look with the competitors for tyrosine, because tyrosine has 3 competitors that prevent it from going across the blood-brain barrier, so we want to have those with the highest ratios. And if you look at it, those with the highest ratios, you can see flax is in there as well. So flax is not only high in omega-3, it also helps with tyrosine. Chia helps. Tofu helps. Pumpkin seeds are actually down there at number 5, soybean number 4. But notice those top 3, spirulina, watermelon, and mustard greens. Now, where can this play a role? Well, tyrosine is the energy producer. And so a lot of people come to our program on caffeine, and they think they need to have their caffeine because otherwise they're the walking dead. But ours is a caffeine-free program because it actually is a frontal lobe suppressant, and it actually increases, it's the fuel for anxiety, and it also can be contributing to depression. And so normally as they're getting through with the program, they're wondering how they're going to stay awake at night if they need to, particularly the truckers that have come through our program. Some of them don't get a call until 5 o'clock in the evening, and they have to deliver a part from Texas to New Mexico in the oil field to allow those 100 workers to still work the next morning. And so they have to drive all night long. And one of the patients that we had, he had high anxiety as a trucker, And he said, Dr. Nedley, I think I'm going to lose my job without caffeine. And I said, no, you won't. Once you're caffeine-free for 2 weeks, I'll give you a choice, mustard greens or watermelon. What do you think he chose? He chose watermelon, and he says it works like a charm. When he gets that call, he'll have that watermelon there in his truck, and he says he likes it far better than caffeine because it doesn't have that wired feeling, and he didn't like that wired feeling. It kept him awake, but now he just feels naturally awake. Now, that's a warning for you all. Once you're caffeine-free and you know about this, don't have watermelon in the evening because you will want to stay up. You're going to have more energy as a result of that. And so watermelon is actually good as a breakfast food, and that's what Erica fed me on Friday to make sure I got all my things done so I could make the plane ride up here. I had watermelon for breakfast as well as other things, and of course that tyrosine level can be very helpful. Then there are certain plant foods that are actually very helpful and can work as promethylating agents. This is like S-adenosylmethionine to help us make the final step of making not only serotonin, but also dopamine and norepinephrine. And this can also come from the stem of that plant. Do you know what those stems are? That's saffron, one of the most expensive spices. But 30 milligrams of saffron daily is equivalent to Prozac in 6 weeks in improving depression scores, but you have none of those bad side effects, like the sexual side effects with saffron. It also improves PMS, even smelling it helps, and in addition, it's worked as well as the leading drug in treating Alzheimer's without the side effects. They compared it with Aricept, which is the leading drug for Alzheimer's. Saffron worked as well, but it didn't have any of those side effects of nausea and the other issues with this, and it may inhibit amyloid beta protein. Recently, there have been 7 randomized controlled trials on saffron, and it's pretty amazing in its benefit. So we will give it to those that have particularly a lack of the serotonin activity, and so there's 2 things in particular that can help them in addition to diet. It is S-adenosylmethionine, which is one of the most expensive herbal preparations that are known because that's also been shown in controlled trials to be very helpful, and saffron. But unfortunately, both of those are very expensive, and no one was putting them together because of how expensive that would be. So our company actually, the one that Eddie knows, Morgan's husband, Nathan, who actually works for that side of things, actually worked with the Nutraceuticals. So now we have both of them together, saffron and SAMe, less expensive than you'll find either one of them alone. And that can be a powerful benefit in regards to the brain chemistry for those who are having challenges methylating due to genetics or other features. Selexon also has been shown to be helpful, 80 milligrams daily. Selexon is a molecule in lavender oil, relief of generalized anxiety disorder, and 76% with over double improvement compared with placebo. It also improves sleep quality, not because it's a sedative, but because it gets rid of the anxiety. So many people don't sleep well due to their anxiety. But as mentioned, it is not a sedative, and it doesn't have that hook. The trade name for it is Lavella, and there was even a study comparing it with lorazepam. 6-week trial showed an improvement in anxiolytic effects comparable to lorazepam. And since lavender oil shows no sedative effects in our study and no potential for drug abuse, Selexon appears to be an effective and well-tolerated alternative to benzos for the amelioration of generalized anxiety. So once again, this is a win-win. You get the benefits, you don't get the risk. Benzos are going to shut down your GABA-producing manufacturing plants after 30 days of taking them. GABA-aminobutyric acid is what helps you feel calm under stress, and so the benzos are short-term gain, long-term problem, because if you ever try to stop them, you're going to end up having tenfold the anxiety that you had before you started it. But Lavella can be helpful as part of an overall program to get off of those benzos. Then folate and B12 deficiency can also be a significant issue because of this pathway. Notice how SAMe is involved in that last methyl step of adding the methyl group to dopamine, 5-hydroxytryptophan, and norepinephrine. And so we want to have enough folate in the diet. We also want to have enough B12. And if it's a methylating problem, we want the methylcobalamin. If it's just a B12 in general, we would like the hydroxycobalamin, which is a detoxifying form of B12. After a review of a number of studies, such as I've reviewed with you here, plus more, the journal Lancet Psychiatry said now a few years ago, now is the time for the recognition of the importance of what? Nutrition, and what else? Nutrient supplementation in psychiatry. Nutritional medicine should now be considered as a what? A mainstream element of psychiatric practice. So if your psychiatrist isn't talking about these things, he's not mainstream, he's not up to date, and you need to find someone who knows the effects of that. And so another factor that improves neuroplasticity is not just diet, but digital minimalism. Digital minimalism means getting rid of the screens in the way we utilize screens in digital devices today. An increasing body of evidence demonstrates the time we spend on what? Smartphones in particular, but it also can be laptops and iPads. And with the usual use of digital media and entertainment screen time is interfering with our sleep, our self-esteem, our relationships, our memory, our attention spans, our creativity, our productivity, and our problem-solving and decision-making skills. These are significant adverse effects, and this is why this is a key ingredient in our program. We emphasize exercise, but we also equally emphasize digital minimalism. And that means getting anything digital or screen out of our life unless it is only useful and doesn't waste time and become harmful or produce these dopamine spikes. Because, you know, even watching a funny YouTube video can produce a dopamine spike, which ends up lowering our dopamine set point over time. So it's going to adversely affect motivation and those sorts of things. This is something that's very important to turn on the positive neuroplasticity switches. By the way, depression and anxiety, one of the reasons why it skyrocketed, it's actually skyrocketed before COVID. 2011 is when the country noticed that there was rapid rates of depression and anxiety, such as had never been seen before in young people in particular. And that was the year that over 50% of people owned a smartphone in this country. And that has been repeated in every country of the world since. So America was the first to have 50% own a smartphone. I was in Kenya in 2019. The rates of depression and anxiety in Kenya have skyrocketed. And in 2019 is when 50% of the public owned a smartphone in Kenya. And so you can see the normal use of these devices are dramatically increased with high rates of depression and anxiety, even self-mutilation. Self-mutilation, now 26% of females under the age of 25 self-mutilate in this country. It used to be 1%. Now it's 26%, fully 1 out of 4. And this is something that they do normally when they're by themselves with a device in the room. There are some adverse brain chemistry changes that have been demonstrated, as well as adverse frontal lobe aspects of things. And one of the main issues is distraction. And these devices, you know, you get on them to maybe do something important, but there's push notifications. There's little chats that come in. There's an email notification. And then there might be a news media notification that Donald Trump said something about another woman. And so you're wanting to see what in the world he said now. And so all of these distractions actually start to prune away the anterior cingulate gyrus of the frontal lobe, which is precisely the area that we need for focused attention and for empathy and control of our emotions. Daniel Goleman, who coined the phrase emotional intelligence, says if people don't build up the neural circuitry that focused attention requires, they will have problems doing what? Controlling their emotions, and what else? Being empathetic. We're in an epidemic in our society of people not being able to control their emotions and having a major empathy problem. And this is one of the key ingredients. And it needs to be talked about. Unfortunately, in Congress today and in the Senate, it is not talked about. There's only one senator who will talk about it. He won't get anyone to second his motions in regards to this. But just imagine, for instance, that a drug was released for the public to get that was supposed to help them in some way, but did all of those adverse things. But yet no one ever measured in the drug companies to see if it did any of those adverse things. And then we found out afterwards it did all those things. And the drug is still being released, and it's still being sold in record numbers. What would we say about that drug company? We would say they're greedy. This is unethical. It's terrible. And those would be news-related items. But it's when it's big tech that does this, they're given a complete pass. Now, they are saying that they are being moral agents now because they're now tracking how much time you are on your devices. And after you have 8 hours of being on your smartphone, there'll be a little message if you get a new smartphone that crops up. You've been on your smartphone for 8 hours today. Press 1 to have this smartphone shut off. Press 2 to keep it going. I mean, how moral is that? I mean, this is something where we really need to do something else. And like I said, there's only one senator that's talking about it. Why aren't the other 99 talking about it? All right. They're on their cell phones. They themselves are addicted to it. But also, big tech gives big money to the senators and those that are running. And so they're not going to touch it all. But we have an issue with this in our country, and more people are talking about it, but it's time that we do something about it. Daniel Goleman says the circuitry for paying attention is identical for the circuits for managing distressing emotions. And so he recommends one of the key successes is a digital Sabbath. How often? Every day, sometime when you aren't being distracted by devices at all or engaged in focused learning. And notice the title of his book, Focus, the Hidden Driver of what? Excellence. That's what we're talking about, is to have that positive neuroplasticity there. So Yalda Uhls has studied this also down in Southern California. She says you can't learn nonverbal emotional cues from a screen in the way you can learn it from face-to-face communication. And so our ability to empathize and even have relationships with others. Social phobias are at an all-time high among young people. They would actually rather text someone across the room in a public place than actually go over there and have a conversation with them. And it's because of the social phobias that are there, but they don't realize face-to-face communication is far superior. If you're not practicing face-to-face communication, you could be losing important social skills as well. And we are social creatures. We need device-free time. But when young people think about device-free time, they think that means they're going to have to sit in their room and do nothing. They don't realize that humanity will not sit in a room and do nothing if they don't have a device. They actually are going to get out and do something. They actually are going to get out and meet people and those sorts of things, and they're going to be much more motivated to do this. So I'm going to skip through some of these other neuroplasticity features on how it occurs, but just one of the other aspects is it's been well proven now, this statement that came from the Bible, by beholding we become changed. And that means our brain becomes changed. And our brain can change in positive ways if we are beholding and focusing on things that are going to improve our brain function. I do want to get to BDNF, however. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor is very important in neuroplasticity. It's a protein that's a brain fertilizer, and it helps the brain to develop new connections, repair failing brain cells, and protect healthy brain cells. Having enough BDNF around, it can even help protect our brains from neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. When BDNF levels are high, acquiring new knowledge is much easier. Memories are retained. People feel happier. BDNF is actually a natural antidepressant. In fact, the new antidepressants are measuring BDNF to see what it'll do. If BDNF goes up, they're really advertising. This drug can be associated with high BDNF. But when BDNF levels fall, the opposite occurs. People have difficulty learning new things. Dementia can occur, and depression is much more common. Interesting study. I myself am a pilot, so I'm interested in some of these pilot studies. These were people who were airline pilots. These were the top level of pilots in the nation. Those with low BDNF levels had a harder time maintaining their skills over 3 years. Their scores dropped twice as fast. Their hippocampus, or their memory center in their brain, became smaller. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Let's see, I think I mentioned this already. So how to increase BDNF levels? Physical exercise, intellectual activity, being social, nurturing relationships, being in sunlight, reducing your stress and managing your emotions, and getting at least 7 hours of sleep per night. One study actually showed that BDNF will not go down even if you're sleep deprived if, and this is a big if you are on a regular aerobic exercise program. So this is an interesting aspect. There's been other studies suggesting this as well. A lot of times people don't get exercise because they're wanting to get enough sleep. But studies show, even though you're sleep deprived, you'd be better off sleeping 1 hour less and exercising for that hour as far as overall brain health. So we need to prioritize sleep. In fact, one of the things I mentioned in regards to balance, one of the ways, there's actually 3 ways, 3 things that should be in balance for positive neuroplasticity, and this can tell you if your lives are out of balance. But if you're not exercising, if you can exercise, you're out of balance. If you are not getting enough sleep, you're out of balance. And if you are not stimulating your brain through devotional exercises, which enhance the frontal lobe. So those are the 3 things. Are you doing daily devotions? Are you exercising daily? Are you getting enough sleep? If you answer no to any of those, you need to reorganize your life and prioritize those things, because that'll be very helpful as far as your BDNF is even concerned. So do you want to be a master in regards to neuroplasticity in your own brain? You need to become the master of your circumstances and not the slave of them. Too many individuals are the slave of their circumstances, and they're not reorganizing their life to become the master of their circumstances. And if you become the slave of your circumstances, you will end up just being a mess instead of a master. So those are the 2 choices. We can make the choices today to become a master, or we can make poor choices that will end up turning us into a mess. We'll close with Eric Braverman, a neuroscientist from New York, that says happiness comes from the interaction between inspiration and perspiration. Anything that stops humans from perspiring to achieve something inspiring gives a what? A false fantasy and an endless distraction from reaching your full potential. Well, I hope this weekend has been helpful to you, and I hope it's been inspirational. But with the inspiration you have, I need to also tell you, to have this be effective, you need to now go and perspire and put that inspiration into practice. And so I certainly wish you the best of health of body, mind, and soul. Also, Erica, many people would like to have more material, and so Erica brought some material with her and with us so that you can peruse that if you so like before you leave. But big thank you to Pastor Nedley and your church for the invitation, and we certainly hope this has been helpful to all of you. God bless you.
say a big thank you to you guys for coming all the way up here to see us. We are very grateful, and I know all of you have benefited from this. I've heard good things throughout this weekend, so feel free afterwards to talk to them out in the lobby. I think the supplies will be out on the table out there, so you can check those out. And we want to thank all of you who have joined us online as well. We hope that you enjoyed, and again,
Okay.
any of you here in person or online, you can watch past presentations on our YouTube channel. Feel free to check those out as well. And I wanted to let you know what the next 2 weekends are going to look like. So next Sabbath, we will have a special guest speaker from our own conference here. Pastor David Yeagley will be joining us from Sunset Lake. He'll be driving down and sharing with us some really cool things. As you know, he has a lot of experience in working with youth and young adults, and we'll be sharing probably some stories from his experience there. And then the Sabbath after that, I'll be talking about forgiveness as we go into our month of thankfulness leading up to Thanksgiving. I thought, why don't we start with forgiveness and then move into thankfulness? So that's what the month of November will look like as well, and we hope that you'll join us for those presentations also. Let's say a closing prayer together. Dear God, I want to praise you and thank you for how you have led in this weekend and all throughout the month of October in this mental health series that we have had. And tonight, God, you are speaking to people's hearts, I know, in ways that I may not see and that each of us may not see. And I ask that you would continue to speak to people's hearts. If there's anyone here who maybe is feeling the need to go down to Weimar and experience the healing that can come from some of the programs there, encourage them to reach out to someone and ask for help to get there. If there is someone who is curious and wants to know more about you and has been recently exploring their relationship with you, God, encourage them to reach out, inspire their mind to ask for someone to lead them in Bible studies, help them to feel confident in contacting this church or other churches in the area, and continue to lead and guide in their life, God. I know that you are a big God and you can do amazing things, and you have the power to help us heal from the difficulties that we experience, both physically and mentally. And I thank you for being with us through all of that. In your name, amen. Thanks to each one of you for joining us this evening.